and your number of years service and what sort of experience you have before you do anything, which I suppose is how the audience know who they're talking to. So I'm a forensic archaeologist. I have 20 years experience almost in the profession, and I've got about over 600 cases that have been to Crown Court or the Scottish version, which is the Procurator's Fiscal Service, the Scottish High Court. It's a very small profession. It's getting it to where it is now, which is almost a profession, has been a very long and very difficult journey, plagued by a lot of misconceptions, not all to do with being a woman, but some of them are certainly. So hopefully what I would like to do today is tell you about something about the journey that I've been on and people in my field have been on over the last 20 years, and then I'll give you some case studies, and I promise no gory bits, I've been told. But some case studies that illustrate how we just worked on the best practice issues from the beginning, because although it's standard archaeological principles, standard archaeology and police procedures don't gel very well together, so there has to be a lot of compromise to make sure that I'm doing my job professionally, I can stand up and be cross-examined in court and prove my point, but also that I'm showing the police procedures, chain of custody, etc. is adhered to. So we started in 1994 with the principle of an archaeologist. I don't think so, not on my site, not on my crime scene. What do they, long-haired from people, I've seen them all on the telly with their roll-ups, etc., etc. And no, it's not. Now, in those days, we were talking to the Swede, who effectively had, when they went to a body recovery, they would take all the bits they could see, and that was sufficient. And that was the way policing was. They've come a long way. They had no, very few females in authority in the police, but even fewer in CID. Most of them, for one reason or another, was to do with child care issues, etc., or to do with the fact there was only one female allowed per shift at the beginning in the late 90s, because there may be issues otherwise, and girls weren't deemed to be able to do the job as well. So there were major problems, and what we had to do was get over the misconceptions of being an archaeologist, and then prove them why they would want that on their site at all, and then why a female one might actually be okay too. So it's been a very long and very difficult journey. As I say, we've had to build discipline, and the reason behind that is to explain to them what sort of information they could get from their crime scene that they wouldn't realise, that would be just missed because it wasn't found. Now, as a profession, we all have great attention to detail. We've got great recording skills. We can find things from our scientific background or our archive background or whatever that a police inquiry team wouldn't necessarily be able to get. So we've had to prove to them that we are valid at a crime scene, and then build those expectations. And by building those expectations, we have an expectation of success, that if you bring an archaeologist on board, then you're going to have total recovery. So you're not going to have somebody coming to a crime scene 3 weeks later and finding a bone. We're going to find the evidence it's happened. We're not going to have the thing going to court and there being evidence that can't put your criminal to the scene because you haven't got all the background information it requires to get that. And that is all about, what it's all about is getting it to court, getting conviction, putting the bad persons behind bars so they can't do it again. So we've had a long process of building awareness with the police, teaching and continuing on successes. For every case, they are all different, all we're using the same principles, but we build on our successes, and you're only ever as good as your last case with the police. A couple of examples here is, that's looking underneath the car. That's the health and safety officer sitting right there, by the way, for the health and safety people in the room. This is is an ice grid. That's in a loch. There was a boat drove over a pile of bones and turned it into fragmented bone. We had to cover all that, put it together and get identity of the person. So we just use standard gridding techniques underwater, underneath 2 meters of water in a dry stretch. So it's all about thinking on your feet, adaptations of the techniques. But in doing so, by getting these successes, we're building on those expectations. And by building those expectations, getting the results, they're more likely to use us again. I should say that even now, there are 3 females in forensic archaeology in the UK, out with the universities. 3 in commercial organisations. And there's probably 6 or 7 men. The rest of them are all universities. But that's for later on. It is a small profession, of course. Now we've moved on to 2014. We're getting there. It's not quite there yet, but life on Mars has become silent witness. So 2 observations here. First of all, I've never seen anybody look that glamorous in a crime scene usually. And if those are policemen, can you tell me where she gets them, please? Because most of mine are short, bald, and talk about nothing but football. So, and what they did last night. I don't know what time they want to know. There are still these perceptions that archaeologists are slightly eccentric, elderly male academics. And when you turn up, they look you up and down. Yes, I am female. Yes, I am an archaeologist, honestly. Now I don't get that so much. I've never really had a problem with being a female, like Rosemary said. It's never been obvious to me, but I'm particularly stubborn, particularly blockheaded, and I wear blinkers, and if I want something, I'll go for it. And it's probably as much my downfall as it is anything else. But I cannot foresee having had a problem realistically over time. Where being female helps now is because media has picked up on this kind of trend of females in archaeology, so the police are now more au fait with that. The forensic science laboratories are full of female scientists, again because females are going into that profession. It's 9 to 5, you can go home, you can look after children, what have you. You cannot do that on a forensic archaeological site. When you have a body found, you have a 48-hour window to get your maximum information out of that site before your chances of identifying who did the crime go dramatically. So you have to work those hours. It's not 9 to 5, it's more like 5 AM to 9 PM at least. I've actually driven to Dundee, done a 14-hour day, and then driven back again to be there at the same time again the next morning. 2 days in a row. It's exhausting, and then that's why you have to be bloody-minded. But it's the only way to do it, and it's nothing to do with gender. It's to do with whether you have that ability to do that for your own personal circumstances or not. You have to be tough, and because of these situations, it's not something that everybody would want to do. Apart from that, it's not everything everybody would want to do because of what you're actually recovering, what the things look like, and I won't go into that. But it's a small profession too, fortunately, so there's a moot point to be had as to whether it's really a gender-related thing. I don't think it is, forensically. I think it's to do with what the person is, a personal level. CRFP is the Council for Registered Forensic Practitioners. That was set up by the Home Office to try and legislate the provision of forensic providers. And there were, at any time, 5 registered forensic practitioners in the field of archaeology. 4 of them were elderly male academics, and then there was me. So I was the only one. The system is now disbanded, so it doesn't operate anymore. But it just shows 5 people in total. There will always be a cost implication, and that is why the police, the title of this slide is it's an accepted discipline, almost. Because when people see you doing a grid recovery of small bits of body or trace evidence, what have you, roundabout something, they think, that looks dead simple, I could do that. So you get the scenes of crimes officers thinking they can do that. That's fine until it comes to court and you're asked for but do you have the piece of paper that says you are entitled to do this? No, they don't, so they can't do it. That's where the case falls apart, and that's where the criminal gets away with it. So it's a situation that the police have to be aware of, and in these days of tightening belts, it's something that we are having to increasingly fight against. But when they realise, when it does go wrong and they realise that yeah, they should have done it the first time properly, then they never tend to do it again. So it's a kind of a self-achieving sort of situation. Throughout my 20 years in this profession, we've tried to inform the best practice and write best practice so that the future forensic archaeologists who come after us will have some basic guidelines, and they're not reinventing the wheel every time. I feel a bit like the female antiquarians that Rosemary and Elizabeth were talking about with their long dresses and they're sitting with their little trowels. 100 years on, but we are pioneers in this profession. It's very new. It's only about 20, 25 years old. We have to merge, as I said, police procedures with forensic archaeological standards, and that's where I sat on the Home Office Professional Standards Committee to write standards in forensic archaeology, and we've now got that done. We've skill mapped that to the IFA Professional Standards in Archaeology, and we now also have the Forensic Archaeology Special Interest Group within the IFA, of which there's an expert panel, and on that expert panel it's only for practicing experts, people who go to court. And joining of that panel is through application and training and basically learning the skills involved to link forensic archaeology to criminal procedures. There is a lot of skills crossover, things that we've had to learn as we've been going along, the different techniques like using graphic illustration, using the sciences, the botany, the entomology, geoarchaeology, as well as primarily the mainstream archaeological skills. And we're always working towards trying to improve how we portray this in court. So our latest thing is we've managed to get our time-lapse recording of a body being recovered into court, and that was incredibly well received. In fact, that got nationwide news as a new technique because it showed the jury quite succinctly how much effort had gone into burying this individual who was buried in a very shallow grave in Edinburgh a few months ago. And it does make an absolutely unique, perhaps certainly significant contribution to public benefit, and as a member of York Archaeological Trust, which is an educational charity aimed at promoting the archaeological for the greater public good, it fits very well within the charitable aims. Next generation, well, I counted my students last month before I came here. The forensic bioscience students, there's 140 of them, 75% are female. The forensic medicine students, there's close to 100 of them, there's about 95 or something like that, of which 68% are female. That's a lot of girls. There are not the jobs for these girls to come on to. As Rosemary was saying, we are educating the public about what's available. We're informing them, but we're not going to give them jobs because there will never be the jobs for these. A lot of them will go into specialists, but that's a good thing. They'll go into specialist areas, informed as to what else can be done. Now, I'm going to move on now to show you just a few case studies that will let you see how we have how we've selected best practice and progression over time. But first of all, I'd like to show you some of our successes. Well, are they successes? Every one of the people in that photograph slide is dead. They've all been murdered, but every one of them has had justice. Their families have had justice because we have, in some way or another, helped the police to find out who murdered them and to put them behind bars. And in many cases, what we've done has actually been instrumental in doing so. And that is why forensic archaeology has become the accepted profession that it is, because the police are now seeing real benefits. Briefly, the first slide, this person was deposited over a period of nearly 4 years. We recovered different parts at different times. We used basic standard stratigraphy, botanical remains. I'm an archaeobotanist as well by training. Botanical duration to work out how long the different body parts have been at these different areas over a 4-mile radius. And to explain that yes, they'd all been put in at the same time and they had all been, nothing had happened to them since. Now that's the sort of information that you cannot get when the people have been in jail for a couple of years, and when you get something as kind of scattered as this. The first part was a river there was a large body part floating down there, and there was torso that was found wrapped here a year and a half later. The head and neck, the 7 cervical vertebrae in anatomical order, were found nearly 2 years later. But because of using standard techniques, we're able to say they all were put in at the same time. Moving on to grid recording, gridded recovery of a body put underneath the floor. There's a very famous photograph. I really wish I'd sold this to the media, because if I had, I would have made a fortune for the company. But because it's been everywhere. The head height is about that. This took 11 days to do, so it's not a quick process. It's incredibly hot, it's incredibly dusty. As soon as you move, you've got 100 years of stew and dust round about you. But the body put through the floor, and all the evidence round about it was round about the body still. So we gridded it, we recorded it and recovered all that sediment, searched it, and plotted it out. And that's what it looks like when it's done. You can say there's nothing else there, but you can also say, you can plot this evidence round about the body. Now this is where we realised that getting the police to do the graphic illustration was not a good idea. Isn't that hideous? There's a red bit there that says head. That's completely unnecessary. From this case on, we did our own graphics. But when you plot that evidence round about, you can say that everything that matters to this case is round about where the body was placed. And this is a very small enclosed area, so it's obviously a controlled environment, but it actually works no matter what the environment is, and we've done numerous cases since to prove this is actually the case. So that helps inform our practice as to how we search for things where the search is focused on. Saying how long something is, a root growing through a jacket. Using the stratigraphy of the vegetation underneath here, this is a body underneath here, skeletonized. The way that the vegetation has grown, we could work that back with the roots, counting the growth rings in the roots. We could actually say that body has been there for the 14 years that person has been missing. So there's no other techniques that can say that other than using the botanical techniques. The chances for invertebrates or insects are long gone at that stage. So moving on to our graphics, which is now a well-established part of any report that we do. We can show it, and it's all about showing to a court how what's happened, when it's happened, why it's happened, and who's there and who wasn't there. So this is an illustration of underneath a house. That's the same bit, trapdoor into it. And all this area here has potential for evidence to be in it, so we have to grid it all, we have to record it all. Just press the wrong button. And when we did record it, we'll just move back a minute. You can see there's a wall there, and there's a body in there. Now, it's covered with sand from a big pile of sand that's in here. But the way in is down through there, break a hole through the wall, drag in there, and cover up. So, yeah, a jury can explain that. I can understand that quite simply. When we do the excavation, this was the first time we had done the time-lapse record. And it's basically just a still camera on a tripod in a corner with a countdown. And every 10 minutes, a timer goes off, and you grab your trowels and your buckets and you run out the way, you take an image, and you go back in and you dig for another 10 minutes, timer goes off, you run out again. But it means that you can have effectively the apple rotting effect, and you can stitch it all together and it looks quite impressive. What it also means is the jury doesn't have to sit through 17 hours of you and nobody talking, because obviously the videos have got they've got sound and people sneezing and phones going off and all sorts of things happening. And you're not going to get a jury watching 17 hours of anything, to be perfectly honest. So they've got the attention span about 3 hours and they need a cup of tea. So doing it this way, you can take that 17 hours and it's about a minute and a half, and the jury will understand it. Now, stratigraphic recovery of that sediment down to level, all of these bags taken off, collected, stored elsewhere, uniquely identifiable. You can go back and search them later for small evidence, and then you can plot that evidence in 3 dimensions. And what you can then do is find out when things have gone wrong. So the body in here is mummified, but the bottom hand is skeletonized simply because it's in of the burial environment. Those finger bones there, jewellery still in place, notice. Finger bones are up there, and you only know that because you've searched that soil. By doing that, you're able to prove that he's been back there. This body's been here for 4.5 years. Somebody has been back there after the body has become skeletonized and covered it up again. Now that's the sort of type of evidence that you can get from just something like as simple as doing a standard stratigraphic recovery. 3 minutes, right, okay, that's good. Oh, nearly finished, I've only got 3 more slides. Right, 1 minute a slide. Again, this is actually the same day as the Glasgow airport was bombed. I was in a cardboard recycling skip, and so this person here was burned. Cardboard here, it was all burned round about him. But underneath him, the cardboard wasn't burned. Finger bones, toe bones scattered round about here. We can cluster the bones, the skin tissue, the personal effects. The one up there is a chicken bone, so we can say it's nothing to do with it. What that tells us is somebody's turned him over and turned him back after he's burned. So therefore it becomes suspicious rather than accidental. He got out of jail on Friday, he's dead on Sunday. It's definitely suspicious. Larger scale, still using the gridded recovery. This is a very large landfill. It looks like total chaos. It's actually not total chaos. We had witness information that this body was here, and then when the witness was brought back, we thought it was there. It's actually found there. We're using a 10-ton excavator, and we broke 1 toe because we're using standard archaeological methods within the police procedures. And the final one is one that's in court very recently. This is a case where the time-lapse photographic record actually came into its own. The police are now putting this forward as a standard practice technique that when a body is being recovered from a covered environment, then they should have the photographic time-lapse record, because it was so helpful for explaining to the jury how these body parts, which were concealed in a shallow grave, were put in, and the extent of the horrific injuries this person had been subjected to, but also the amount of effort that had gone towards putting them away. So, when we think of the future, what is the future? It's nothing whatsoever, in my opinion, certainly in the forensic sphere, to do with gender. It's to do with competence and personal ability to do this, whether because you want to do it, whether because you're not squeamish, and there's plenty males and females that would both go, no, not having that job. And when you put into the mix, I also do stomach contents analysis for forensic investigation. There's even less people want to do it. But there are so many students coming up that are all female, and there are not the jobs for them, and they are going into specialist spheres as a result. But as a scientist, I'm going to end on a final scientific note, bring back Darwin into it, seeing as I'm the current modern antiquarian, and say it's natural selection, nothing to do with gender, in my opinion. It's to do with ability and desire to do the job in a very small sphere. Thank you.
As time pushes on, I'm going to keep trying to move the papers through, because I think, hopefully we're storing up our questions for heated discussion after we've all been refreshed with tea and coffee. So, on to our third paper. Rita Crouch from the University of Bradford and Hannah Cobb from the University of Manchester. Don't know quite how you're going to do it with the document paper, you see. Encouraging diversity in archaeology. Oh, sorry, in archaeology in the future. Hand over to you guys.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting us here to speak today. It's really great to be here celebrating International Women's Day, and it's really great
To see our slides.
And it's really great to be here in the Celebrating Women session. However, we want to start with what may seem to be a potentially contentious point. That is, we don't want to celebrate women in archaeology.
Rather, we don't just want to celebrate women in archaeology. What we don't want to do is take an add women and stir kind of approach to archaeology. Instead, what we're interested in here is equality and diversity on a broader level. And in fact, we don't really want to add and stir anyone, so we can put our spoons away at this point. Rather, what we want to do in the next just under 30 minutes, hopefully, is to present a theoretical stance which is inspired by feminist ways of thinking, which we think is really useful for examining and demonstrating how the diversity of those who do archaeology is enmeshed into the discipline, and how this affects the archaeological practice and the interpretations that we make, and how explicitly recognising this enables us to celebrate diversity.
It's worth saying as well, both Hannah and myself have backgrounds in education. We both worked for the Higher Education Academy for some time, and therefore we're deeply concerned with pedagogy in archaeology. That is, with teaching and learning and researching teaching and learning. We think that through thinking about teaching and learning, we can take a new approach to changing the future of archaeology tomorrow. And we're concerned with providing and thinking through solutions to some of the imbalances that we've been hearing about today. And in this way, we hope we can establish a new bottom-up approach for change, which recognises, develops and celebrates diversity generally. But before we do this, we want to take a look at some of the existing statistics.
So I thought we'd start with the good news first, which is this is from the most recent Profiling Profession report. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with this, but it's the labour market statistics that have been gathered previously by the IFA. It was Landward Archaeology that did this most recently under Kenny Aitchison and Bill Rocks and Queen. From this most recent profile in the profession, they've shown that the gender balance in archaeologists is the division between the two is getting smaller. And so the profile in the profession report has been undertaken every 5 years or so, and these are the results from those reports. And thank you. I've got to change the slide. Oh, there we go. But what we want to do is just scrutinise this a little bit further, and I think as soon as you do, you can see that there are more troubling patterns that emerge. So particularly, there's still an extensive gender imbalance in archaeologists over the age of 40, and I know this was discussed a little bit earlier, but effectively what we're looking at here then is a lack of women in senior managerial and professorial posts, or a more limited number of women in those positions anyway. And I think the other thing to note here is that profiling the profession assumes that there's only two gender identities. So we've got absolutely no idea of the amount of people in archaeology who might conceive of their gender in any way that's beyond the norm, let alone the correlation between that and age as well. And if we look at profiling professions' other diversity statistics, we can see as a discipline how limited our disciplinary diversity is. So the disability status of archaeologists has got a little bit better. So in the most recent one, 98.2% of archaeologists are not disabled, and it's a little bit worse in terms of ethnic diversity. So in the most recent statistic, 99.2% of archaeologists are white. And I think it's a shame in a way that ethnicity and disability aren't correlated with gender and age as well, to further scrutinise that. But effectively, these are slides which show nothing new. So the previous profiling profession studies and lots of other literature out there has made the point that we know archaeology isn't a very diverse profession in the UK.
And a couple of summers ago, Hannah wanted to dig into the data in a bit more detail. So she instigated the Digging Diversity project, which I'll let you tell.
Yeah, so Digging Diversity was a study where I looked at a whole series of different elements of disciplinary diversity. I studied participants from higher education academies, institutions even, and from professionals across the profession. And I also looked at the student body as well. And so 58% of the people who responded were students, and the rest were employed in the profession. And the results were really interesting. They point to the need for a more nuanced thinking through disciplinary diversity than we can see in any kind of labour market statistics. So the profiling profession study is something that's generally interested in broader labour market detail. It's not as interested in diversity as perhaps we are here. For instance, it looks at the amount of men and women. Now, rather than asking people to check a box as to whether they were men and women, I asked participants in the study to note their own gender identity. So you can see that there is a percentage of archaeologists here who have said that either they want to define their gender or that they define their gender in a non-normative category. And also we can see that when participants got a chance to list their disabilities, there's a really wide range of disability here. Now, the difference between this and profiling profession is that data is provided by employers, as far as I understand it, and so there's going to be a lot of disabilities that employers are either not aware of, that employees might not want to disclose to their employer, that kind of thing, whereas here the participants were able to answer themselves. But I think the thing that is most striking here is not just that the picture is more complicated than the labour market statistics, but also that it's the students here who have a much greater amount of diversity. So there's many more disabilities here within the student column than there are within the professional column. And similarly, I found that students listed much greater diversity in their gender, their sexuality, and their ethnicity as well. Particularly, even that category of white isn't a homogenous category within itself. And I think this is really important because, as we've already heard, archaeology in the UK is the graduate profession, and yet in archaeology we talk about somehow we're not particularly diverse, but in reality it's people who are studying archaeology, students, who are diverse in various ways, and this kind of diversity is not as clearly mirrored in the workforce. So whilst we might want to celebrate the narrowing of the gender gap, the limited number of women in senior and managerial positions, and the disparity in diversity figures between students and professionals all indicate that there's clearly a series of barriers that exist that are preventing people who are not white, able-bodied men to progress into the profession.
And ourselves and many others have argued that these barriers are due to our modern masculist and Cartesian frameworks. These frameworks which perpetuate these conceptual perceived divisions, which are rendered natural and inherent, and are therefore perpetuated in our theories, in our practice, in our narratives about the past, in our disciplinary structures, and in our teaching. So, how might we deal with this? We've been thinking about this problem from a different perspective and thinking about the value of philosophical approaches to this, both an epistemological and an ontological level. That is to say, not just in the structures of knowledge that underpin archaeology, but in the doing and being of archaeology too. The first two bodies of theory which we've been drawing on are feminist inspired theories, which I'm sure many of you here are familiar with, and probably more so than we are, which advocate that multivocality in thinking about the past. And we've also been thinking about approaches inspired by Deleuze's work in process philosophy, and that's thinking about the work of Ingold and his meshworks, or De Lander and his assemblages. But before we get to thinking about those theories, we're going to think for a moment about the feminist critiques and feminist impact. As we know, feminist critique in the past has not just been about the fight for equality, although that's been fundamental. It's also been about critiquing our research practice and thinking about how we communicate the past. It's been challenging our research methods, which argue to be masculist, with that prioritising of a dominant voice, very empirical, scientific, perceived as being objective, and with the sole voice of an excavation director, creating this sole narrative about our archaeology. And while post-processual archaeologists have taken this to task, there's still a desire for key narratives to come out of our archaeology, whether that's about a particular site, a particular region, or a particular period in archaeology. In reality, however, we know that our archaeology, the archaeology we excavate, is rarely clear-cut. It's full of ambiguities, and so much of it is down to interpretation. And therefore, feminist methodologies which are more flexible, which are more communal, which are less competitive, and which are open to ambiguity, give rise to new interpretations about the past and new understandings of how we do and write archaeology. Such debates have been influential in the development of more reflexive and interpretive field practices, such as those advocated by Ian Holland or Gavin Lucas, for instance, and in the increasing popularity of community archaeology. In fact, we were wondering about the role of community archaeology in the financially dominant market that we heard in our introduction earlier. We're also thinking that with different methods, new understandings of the past are enabled. And key to this is a recognition that the portrayal of the past is complex and interpretive. It is a process that should not simply conclude with one sole dominant voice or account, as is traditionally the case, with the excavation director or principal investigator as often the sole author on publications or narratives told about the site. And we want to take this one step further by arguing this not just in the production and dissemination of research, but we should take a multivocal approach. And we draw upon philosophy to argue that everyone who participates in and teaches archaeology impacts upon interpretations of the past, on methodological practice in the present, and on one another. And in this way, it's useful to consider how archaeology is a combination of multiple assemblages and meshworks. And in a second, we'll explore this further with an example, but first I'm going to hand over to Hannah to talk a bit more about meshworks and assemblages.
Yeah, so I know at this stage in the afternoon people don't want to go intensely into process philosophy, so let's not. But let's just summarise it very briefly. Sorry. So these are the concepts that we're really interested in. Come from approaches that advocate relational and flat ontologies, which enable us to think about how people and things are always already entwined in the world, and how neither is prior, and both are continually in production through their relationships with one another. So Tim Ingold calls this kind of idea meshworks, and Manuel De Lander approaches the issue slightly differently, and he thinks about assemblages. And there's significant differences between those two, but for the sake of this paper, we're going to conflate them and roll them into one a little bit. Because ultimately, both of these approaches examine the way that people and things combine and emerge from the interweaving of multiple voices and things and places, which sometimes fixes them to a specific place and sometimes it deterritorializes them. And assemblages in turn belong to or affect other assemblages, and they operate and entwine at different temporal and different spatial scales as well. So we think this is a really useful body of theory, but I can see people already dropping off. So we'll work it through with a nice little example which comes from Gavin Lucas, who is using this to talk about materiality and people. he uses the example of a pot. So he says, assemblages are almost always ephemeral, and most of the assembly elements which combine in them depart and recombine elsewhere. The potter's hands go to eat lunch, the tools go back to the bench, the remnant scraps of wet clay are tossed outside and washed away in the first rains, or recombined with a new paste. All that remains is the pot itself. Almost all, if not all objects, are then, strictly speaking, residues of prior assemblages. Moreover, all such assemblages are inevitably incorporated into new assemblages. So you could go on to think about the pot on a shelf or as a family heirloom. But this is not just a biographical perspective, this is a perspective that enables us to think how the pot and the materials and the hands and the shelf and all of those kind of things might intertwine to produce new understandings of the world. And these kind of perspectives are really useful because they undercut a series of dualities. So they've been mostly, well, so far, really applied in archaeology through studies of materiality, because they undercut that sort of division between people and things, and also between subjects and objects. But what we want to argue here is that we think this is also a really useful way for undercutting divisions in terms of diversity within archaeology as well. So it enables us to move beyond narrow analytical frameworks that limit us to considering one area of diversity, like gender, and then one area of the archaeological, of archaeology or archaeological practice, like the profession. And it enables us to examine how these different assemblages might be enmeshed and how they might emerge together. And if we do this kind of thing, then we can think about how, particularly in archaeology, the homogeneous categories of identity, from woman to man to student to teacher to professional, are not homogeneous categories together, and neither are the practices in which we engage. But instead, all of these kind of things emerge in really complicated ways in relation to one another through the act of doing archaeology and creating new knowledge about the past.
So let's think this through an example to help illustrate what we mean, and particularly to help think how this might relate to teaching and learning. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, an excavation site. There's another one. Imagine it's a research excavation with students learning their field skills in the field. A traditional approach might think about the role of, we're going to think about the role of students here. A traditional approach might consider students as making a small contribution to knowledge, mostly through informing their supervisors knowledge and recording, which then leads up to the director and creates that single narrative and interpretation about the site. A feminist approach might look at multiple narratives. It might think about a democratization of voice. Post-processual archaeology has taken this to incorporate multivocality and interpretation in dissemination. Excuse me. And that's all great, but we want to consider a view of this process influenced by process philosophy described by Hannah. Taking this approach already asks us to begin with a different mindset, which acknowledges that, as with Gavin Lucas's pot example, each participant on an archaeological site, and therefore each part of that specific assemblage, is also entwined with different assemblages off-site, and with the residues of assemblages they were once entwined with. So with this in mind, let's consider the assemblage of a site. This comprises of students learning. They will bring with them their own experiences or inexperiences, and will in turn learn from their supervisors and their peers. Their supervisors are equally equipped with their own skills and strengths, securities, insecurities, informing and forming their students. As they excavate side by side, students and supervisors are entwined with the assemblage of a trench, with trowels, mattocks, spades, buckets, context sheets, and all material things are equally part of this assemblage. They are all entwined, all act on one another, continually constituting this assemblage.
So in all of the events that happen on the site, the assemblage of the site emerges not just as a multivocal interpretation of the past, but as a site in which people and things also emerge in the present as well. And they're affected as much by archaeological practice as by their archaeological findings, and by the relationship with material things and relationships with other people as well. So through this kind of perspective, we can think about, through this kind of perspective, we can think about how people, so women, men, and transsexuals, and transgender, and black, and white, and disabled, and students, and academics, and commercial archaeologists, whoever else you might want to list, how they're entwined with one another and with all the kind of stuff of doing archaeology, like trams and sieves and lithics and context and anything else you want to name. So each brings to the site multiple understandings of the past and the present, and through their mixtures and their entwining, a whole host of new understandings emerge. So if it's viewed in this kind of way, as an assemblage of multiple materials and persons and residues of other assemblages all merging together, then issues surrounding equality are foregrounded and divisions between different agents are undercut. I think you may be thinking, well, this is a lovely theoretical approach you're presenting to us, but you might feel rather sceptical about the large-scale applicability of this kind of idea that we're presenting to any of the archaeology we do in the UK. And I think that scepticism is quite justified, because if you think about all the lovely writing about feminist writing and post-processual writing about multivocal methodologies, really very little of that has filtered through into either academic or commercial practice. And so for us, this is where pedagogy comes in. This is where pedagogy is really important, because it's this that we need to change. And I think if we change this, it will then have a knock-on impact. I think this is, for us, the kind of solution that responds to the questions that we heard in the first part today.
So ultimately, the problems and barriers to disciplinary equality and diversity are endemic throughout the discipline. So much so that even in the student body, where, as we have shown, there is greater diversity in gender, ethnicity, disability and sexuality than in the rest of the profession, the academic structures in which the students learn reflect and perpetuate a striking lack of diversity. And this arises from a number of factors. In particular, despite a concerted feminist critique in archaeology, it's still the case that academics at the top hierarchies are mostly male, white, heterosexual, middle class, frequently Oxbridge educated, as we've been hearing about this morning. And accordingly, accounts of the past, crucially, still reflect exactly these kinds of perspectives. Crucially, the reason that critiques like this made by that have been being made by feminists for over 30 years still need to be made today is that the structures of academia perpetuate androcentrism and heteronormativity, because it is those who have benefited from the current status quo by scoring highly in the current systems that consequently go on to perpetuate it by judging research and its outputs and dictating research and reward, for instance, on the panels of funding bodies and promotional boards. And this is changing, thankfully, but hopefully we can drive that change even further. At this fundamental level, pedagogy itself is also undermined because the traditional power structures to which we refer ultimately reward traditional research topics and relegate teaching and research into teaching into second place. You only have to look at AHRC criteria or funding grants, for instance, to see that research into our students is a no-go for getting credible funding. In turn, this renders students as passive recipients of a very specific view of the past.
So with this in mind, it's no wonder really then that undergraduates who don't conform to the norms that they see in their lecturers and that they hear in accounts of the past then feel unable or unwilling to pursue a career in archaeology. And yet, as we've shown already with our case study of the training excavation as an assemblage, a perspective that arises from process philosophy enables us to think about students not just as passive recipients of knowledge, but as equally entwined in the production of new knowledge about the past, in a way in which their own different perspectives and the residues that they bring from different assemblages are all important in the emergence of the assemblage in the field. And I think the most important thing to say is that this can also be realised in the classroom as well, because teachers and students are like all components of an assemblage, which is the university. Oh, this is my class who kindly posed for me earlier this week. And so they act upon each other, and they impact upon each other. So if you view them in this way, students aren't passive, but instead their interactions with one another and with their lecturers impact on the outcome of the class, as well as on research questions as well. So, for example, a student might ask a question which then prompts a rethinking of an aspect of one's research or its communication, or the different backgrounds of students and lecturers and people within the class might bring out different opinions which actively inform debate and actively inform knowledge construction. And if you think about it, the classroom is also a component of a larger assemblage which incorporates the field and other assemblages that are people's lives both beyond the excavation and the classroom. So if we think through academic practice in this kind of way, we can cut across binary opposites or pigeonholed identities in the past and in the present to challenge traditional androcentric and heteronormative interpretations and practices and power structures. And I think most crucially, this happens by recentering the voices of the diverse student body as being valuable, and therefore valuing diversity and empowering students who don't conform with norms to progress into the profession. So effectively, taking this stance towards pedagogy is crucial to challenging the barriers in equality and diversity that currently exist for archaeology graduates.
But in addition, taking this stance towards pedagogy, towards teaching and learning, has the potential to make fundamental changes to the way academics practice, and therefore to the diversity of the academic workforce, and to challenging traditional biases in research. This is because this approach resituates the different components of what academics do as valuable. So teaching is not just valuable because it enables students to pass exams, but it embeds knowledge, it builds identities, it encourages critical thinking and informs research, and affects us as lecturers, as well as impacting on the archaeology of the future. If students are recognised as playing an important role in the production of an archaeological assemblage and knowledge about the past of a field, about their role in research, and the enmeshed relationship between pedagogy and research is illuminated, stimulating research into pedagogy and practice, and challenging the hierarchies which are based on the reward of traditional research remits. In turn, this enables different archaeologies to be told, crucially, themselves enabling the engagement of a broader audience of potential students and future archaeologists. Just our last slide.
So really, just to wrap up very quickly, what we're proposing here today is a radical rethinking of the approach that we take to archaeological epistemology and ontology, and at the heart of this, we argue, is pedagogy, it's teaching and learning. Through foregrounding pedagogy as important, we can impact on students and revalue and recenter the different voices of the diverse participants in archaeology. And in turn, that impacts on the sustainability of the discipline and its diversity, whether that's related to gender, race, ability, class, or any other category.
It's through recentering teaching and taking a holistic and ontological approach that diversity in our discipline will be enabled. Through a reconsideration of teaching and academic practice, greater value and effort in our teaching will start to shape the archaeologists of the future. We perpetuate the systems and values that we have been taught. Through rethinking our teaching, we can begin to examine how to encourage others, how to value different participants, and how to enable a more diverse archaeology of the future. This will not only impact on the demographics of a discipline, but will inform new understandings about the past, new interpretations, and new ways of thinking, which enable us to celebrate not only women, but a whole host of participants in archaeology.
Thank you very much. There's a danger in this, but push on. So our final day of 14. So again, question 5. The gentleman over with Jane Henderson from Cardiff, we're going to talk about sometime article woman.
I'm actually going to sing it.
Even better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to carry out. Are you judged? I'm going to need it.
So you're going to do the... Sorry, I'm just trying to work out our double act here. Is that more than wise with different characters? Anyway, thank you very much for inviting us to talk, and thank you so much for all the speakers along before us. It's been absolutely fantastic. I've been very kind of inspired, enraged, absorbed, you know, in various measures throughout the day. So Jane and I are here today, and really also it's a kind of a personal walkthrough, partly because we think that the personal is also the political. And also, we don't actually study gender in archaeology. The people we're actually reflecting on is our lives, and then possibly, when later we'll reflect on our careers within a sort of broader context of what's going on elsewhere. So, as the song says, sometimes it's hard to be a woman. You know, I mean, or is it? You know, let's find out. Let's follow Jane and I's journey through our sort of academic lives. I mean, this kind of picks up on what something that the last speakers were talking about. It's kind of who am I and the way I see and the way I view my career is actually based on who I am. I can't not become a woman, and I can't not be married, but you know, I can't not have children, so it's very hard for us to unpick all of these things. You know, and so people will say, you would believe that because you're a ... So, you know, so I mean, I have to acknowledge, you know, I am married, I do have children, I'm now married to an archaeologist. You know, I mean, I actually have a science degree, my first degree wasn't in archaeology, maybe this does actually, you know, affect the way I view discipline as well. I have a PhD, I'm lucky enough to have one of them. And one of the more interesting things which we're going to be turning to later is that Jane and I are part of this thing called Generation X. Generation X dates from... It's
Grew up in the 70s.
Yes, you grew up in the 70s. Yes, okay. And I think it finishes around 2000, isn't it? Anyway, disagreeing with him. But basically, we're Generation X, and the people who teach are actually Generation Y. Okay? So, if we look at, you know, this is my gendered career. Where did I start? Where did I go? And where have I ended up? So, if I can get the pointers into work. Oh. Yeah. Okay, so if you just sort of look, basically you should be able to tell there is a, you know, a journey through time. So I start off in my all-girls school. Perhaps that's where I got the spot in my life, because I went to a convent grad school. You know, I headed into science GCSEs, you know, portions begin to drop. By the time I got to A levels, I was hanging around in physics A level with I was the only girl of 45 boys. I then went to Imperial College. 87% men, only 13% women. You know, so my career changes. Then, sort of at some point, I decided to leave biology and head into archaeology. And so, on reflection, I'm thinking, did I do that because, in fact, there weren't women in my discipline, and I wanted to go and sort of hang out in a more balanced community. So I went through my postgraduate career. Again, as we've heard today, in the results of postgraduate careers are actually quite often very gender balanced, and animals as well. And then the stars were where I gave birth. Okay? So after finishing my postgraduate degrees, I went into field archaeology briefly. Then I had a child. I was unlucky enough to be made redundant whilst on maternity leave. I had to fight an industrial tribunal over that. That was exciting. And then eventually, I sort of worked for English Heritage, and I worked in labs. And I worked in this sort of, scientific, post-processing, archaeology was in fact dominated very much by women. Everybody I worked with was female. All of my line managers were female. And, I worked for places like, for example, I worked in Southampton with a number of women. And in zoo archaeology, actually had a very proud tradition of large amounts of women. So that was all going fine. I actually became a regional science advisor for English Heritage. Again, when that was conceived, we were all women, there were no men. And then, I left the outside world and I went into academia. And then sort of, as I went into academia, the portion of women I was around, as again we've seen, it's sort of all this parity and the junior roles, then as you go higher up, the numbers drop. Okay? So, another thing that we were sort of thinking about is, well, what's possessed me to carry on? Who am I? Why have I persisted in these ideas? So again, it's sort of pulling, from the points we had earlier, and actually quite a lot of the conversations are drawn out some of these things is who's a fellow traveller with you? Who actually, who do you look at? How do you survive? What keeps you going? Is it that my mother was a single mother and was a role model to me because my father died when I was young? My sister now runs an international charity for sexual reproductive rights. She's always been a role model. I was a punk rocker. That was a fantastic time to be a girl. I've had various excellent managers within English Heritage. And a lot of the time I've been very inspired by, I call them sort of the older returnees. There were a number of women in zoo archaeology who had families, then came back into archaeology and continued to work with children. And I guess it was their sort of gentle benevolence and support through the times when I was starting to have a family that was actually incredibly helpful. Because these people sort of helped me. You know, it's quite interesting. I was part of the university women's mentoring scheme. I was mentored by Nancy from Bangor. It's Nancy Evans from Bangor. I mean, she was so useful. That was only in the last 12 months I've actually had sort of, you know, a female mentor. And was I inspired by my lecturers? I did a biology at college. I actually asked my husband. I don't remember there being a single female lecturer in our entire department. You know, in Sheffield, where I was there, for example, there was Dennis Jones, and I think there's probably some other women, but I don't really remember them very clearly. You know, and a lot of it is just looking around, sort of seeing who's on the journeys with you, and kind of hoping that they're still there when you get to the end. And those are the people who keep going. As we've heard time and time again, what happens to me next? So, if you think of me, it's off the screen at the moment, so the next level up is dominated by men, and then men like the way to vice chancellor, who is of course male. And it's actually one of those points, you know, it's kind of how do I project myself forward and how do I sort of think of myself in those terms. And there's not a decision about whether I can do it or not. There's that kind of little mental space where you try to decide what you would look like in that job. It's actually quite hard to work out what would you look like. So this is just to show, in fact this is graphics, I kept thinking someone's going to put this darn graph up. But they didn't, hurrah! This is what they call a scissor graph. So you can see that as you go up the pay scale, there's lots of women, there's lots of women in lower paid jobs, less slower proportion of men. As you go, at some point it crosses over. This is the point where we keep talking about all the women disappear. The women disappear, and what happens is you at the upper echelons, the upper pay scale is completely dominated by men, and the women at the bottom. Now Jane and I, we think that we're both somewhere here. So we've made it. If you think that this is the glass ceiling, we've smashed through it, or have we? So Jane, talk now. Talk more.
Yes, please. So rather than tracing my life as well, we both, the other thing I thought it was interesting to say that not only we both crossed the scissor, we're both also over 40, which is not often a point of celebration, but today we're going to make it one. Looking then at where we find ourselves and what we do, I'm sure that, like everyone, again, our life is a complex series of different aspects. We're not just our career, we're not just our job, or many of us aren't anyway, and then we find ourselves with a whole number of aspects to our life. And presented like this, it looks like a happy, balanced life. But I wonder, in fact, rather than a life balanced, it's a life divided, a life where you're pulled apart, pulled in many directions, with every claim trying to be the biggest claim on your life. In my career, I'm actually not an archaeologist, I'm a conservator. And as a conservator, I also look with the outsiders in the archaeology community. And in my first job, I was treated differently. I know I was treated differently, but I'm not sure it was my gender, being a conservator, the purple hair, the Dr. Martin boots, the insistence on wearing anti-cortex badges when we were told not to, and so on and so forth. So I couldn't really identify a specific aspect of discrimination as an issue of gender. Simply more as not fitting in, not being like the other people around you, not playing nicely. And this is where I'm going to integrate the domestic and the work sphere. And also, if I can just point out here, this is my assemblage. There we are, that's my Lego assemblage. How do we cope? How do we make it work? And I think the answer is, we were discussing this, how do we make it work? And the first answer is, well, we fail at some aspects. So here's me failing to parent, here's my children being looked after by a we, and here's my housework not being done. But we said, hang on a minute, isn't that a classic cop-out of women? To look at their lives and to judge themselves, to feel guilty and to blame themselves for not doing a good job. And in fact, if we really push on this job, we don't think we're terrible parents, but you do. I think I'm great. So there has to be more than that to it. So what is it that allows us to survive? And what we think is that allows us to survive is the support networks that are around us. And those are support networks and those role models are the people who help us. For me, there was a time in my life which I can identify as a gender-specific situation where I would have crumbled if it hadn't been for my support networks. And this is a group of people, mostly women, but not exclusively, who could identify a need that I had and would come in, step in and help me out. And we agreed that, and it's interesting when we were discussing what allows women to survive, you can have money. 2 aunts can leave you an inheritance. That works very well. You can marry well, have the money that way. You can buy the support networks that you inherited in the first place, or if you haven't got any of those options, you have to build it the hard way, through friends, through colleagues, through people who support you. And we think that perhaps is the route that we've taken, and perhaps that is the newer route for women in archaeology, and one which is about a cooperative approach, one about teamwork and sharing. But those words and those concepts are not ones which are the hallmark of successful academics, where it's about impact and exceptional and being the best and on your own and a leader. So these do end up in interesting places. So that's really our story, and it's just obviously been an anecdote about us. We also thought it would be interesting then to widen the anecdote pool. Jackie wants to say something.
Sorry, what I was supposed to point out earlier was that as a member of Generation X, I think somebody else said it earlier, was when I was at university, Imperial College, I was approached by women in science and technology, and I was asked to reflect on my own career. I think I was probably in the 2nd or 3rd year. I mean, it was terrible, I have to say, looking back, but I had no conception. I filled it in, saying that I could not identify any sexism towards me at that point in my career. I mean, even though I was I thought the feminism was about, I thought that was something different, and I thought that I'd actually kind of succeeded and got through it all, you know, and I was 18, 19, I got to Imperial College, and I made it, you know, and I was going to rock up to the top. And it's interesting, you know, as to reflect back on that now. However, but we've been asking the same question of people who were like me at that time, really. Sorry, give it back.
So we went to Generation Y and we asked them about their experiences. Now, when you've got to make 2 World War Day costumes, the only way to do good research is through SurveyMonkey. So that's what we did. The first question was asking basically we asked our graduates about their what pressure they feel to moderate their behaviour. It's quite interesting that the answer was kind of split. Some felt they had and some felt that they hadn't. And for this one, the numbers aren't telling us the comments. And here are some of the comments. These are just really in order that they came in. Someone wrote, I have to be careful of what I say or do. People have commented on my language. I have been encouraged to wear less jewellery, speak less informally, and conform. Be less direct in requests and statement. This is a good one. Slap on lipstick when dealing with engineers. I've noticed in myself a tendency to reduce. I find that sad. I dress appropriately and keep some distance, and I be super polite. Don't swear. It helps to be tomboyish. Now you can hear these are just answers that people have dashed up on their phones, but I think they're just interestingly telling in that sort of pressure to be smaller, to be less of a woman, except when you have to be all of a woman. And you can't really be your entire self. And perhaps, you know, this would have been good advice to my Dr. Martin wearing black fingernail, purple haired self, who was called Stompy by the people I worked with. I don't know why. And perhaps it would have helped me not lose one of many jobs I lost. The next question we asked was about career and family, and this is our Generation Y, so it comes as less surprise to those coming behind us, perhaps a bit younger. There's still a slight tendency to err towards the side of career than to family. And we felt that that wasn't a tremendous surprise. And I think also the other thing that we wanted to say here is that the data shows that people have different experiences. In the same way that, you know, Rosemary and Jenny said that they felt that they haven't experienced sexism and Jackie hadn't in her young life, different people have experienced sexism in different ways, and they have experienced the impact on their career in different ways. So when asked how gender has impacted on their career, you can see that no one, well, there's some people saying nothing, all the way to some people saying hugely significant. And I think it is not a uniform experience. It's not the case that all women are taken aside at the age of 15 and given a lecture on how they have to keep quiet, shut up, don't have opinions. But then on the other hand, you do hear, I did hear it coming out of the nursery, someone think how bossy their daughter had been. I was thinking, isn't that nice? A nice little lesson, you're 3 years old, don't be speaking up, don't be trying to have a say. So there is, to some extent, women are told not to push forward, but it's a different world for different people. But the one question that's been very telling is we asked people, do you think that women who express ambition are judged differently from men? We had 4 men answer the survey. The 3 no's are all the men. So I think that we're not surprised that Generation Y may have different experiences in terms of what they've done on a day-to-day basis, but they live in the same world that we do. They look around at the world that we do, and they can see the very, very clear messages that women, from scientists to historians, are not valued the same way. So just to take 2 from the recent social media, Nigel Lawson with his experience in writing diagrams versus Professor Julius Lingo on the question of global warming. Nigel Lawson thinks it's okay to say he's just this Julius Lingo woman who's made an absurd statement. Apparently, her gender is one of the 60, the whole amount of words used in this debate. Her gender is a critical element in that. And the other one that's very much in the news is the situation with Mary Beard and the problem that she's had from speaking out. And the quote that I wanted to make from her was that women pay a very high price for being heard. It's not that you're not heard, it's not that you can't be a success, but her experience is that. And I wondered, you know, it harks right back to the description of the unfortunate and tactless woman. The women are described in those terms and in those ways.
Yes, well, this was, I asked someone, I had a discussion group with 1,200 zoologists around the world, and then kind of response to thinking about, we need to think about ourselves as role models and how we got on. I asked for people to suggest role models and make comments if they wanted to. And so this was sort of comments that one moderately senior female academic that surely said to me, and this is the good bit, this is that reply to this, the reply is what works when I try to counter-lead my discussion with her. So I mean, but the point is, what's coming out of this is, that, I think that I actually think, well, the collective eye roll was the interesting one about that, but is it that sort of discussions are a conspiracy by men to sort of distract women? And that we're all here, we're just wasting our time. I should be at home writing the paper, what am I doing here talking to you? This is not important, and I shouldn't even be, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of time. But I mean, our point is, if you look at the data, it is not a waste of time. There is something, as we've heard time and time again, there's something systemic and endemic. If we have equal numbers of people entering as undergraduates in our discipline, for example, and then what happens to them in the end? So what is that question? What does go on? And I was lucky enough to go to a talk last week given by, what's her name? Alison Byer. And she's a woman who's published, she actually does review stuff as opposed to just opinionated on the stage, like we're doing. But she has done a lot of research on this thing called the glass cliff. And this is kind of the stage of life that Jane and I are at, as if you got to the glass ceiling, it seems there's a new disaster waiting to befall you, or that's been identified, and it's called the glass cliff. And this is because somebody put in her pigeonhole an article in the Times that indicates that women were disastrous for companies, because a higher proportion of failing companies were led by women. And what she actually discovered was that women are given headships of failing companies. Women are more often put in precarious situations, and they're more often promoted into positions where they have less support. Believe me, you have to read her entire paper because she does take it apart piece by piece by piece. And you realise that it's not overt, it's kind of subvert. And it's because people think that they identify feminist characteristics, which they again have been asked, they describe them to men or women, and they say female characteristics are more often ascribed to women, that these feminine characteristics are what you need to give to somebody who's in a crisis with no help. And that is where you put women. So of course what happens is no matter if you get through to the point you are, then what will happen is somebody will probably offer you a job. And you think, oh, that's great, look, they want me to lead this. This is in crisis. I'll be able to sort it out. And the point is, it's not that you're any better or any worse than men. You're just probably put in a situation that's actually just less stable than if you'd be put in if you were a man. And in fact, she then went on to talk on a Woman's Hour with Jenny Murray about this piece of work. And Jenny Murray quoted to her a fruit magnet she had, which is a statement quote by Eleanor Roosevelt, who said, "Women are like tea bags, you only know how strong they are when they're in hot water." And Jenny Murray said to her, she said, "Well, that's great, you know, women were great in a process." And she said, "But my response is, you always want to be in hot water." You know, the fact that you're all adequately skilled to do it means, imagine how much more you could do if you were allowed to build on successes and not constantly put in positions when you know, you're actually fighting hard just as an rival. So, I mean, she then went on and they did a survey to the BBC, and they asked people to sort of reflect on this. What they discovered, you know, how do people perceive the explanation for the fact that women end up, you know, in riskier positions than men? Women had a whole series of suggestions. You can see women generally thought it's because of group dynamics, as in more men hire men. Women are expendable, social company factors, women, you know, have the opportunities, so they accept risky positions, you know, appointments being made to trade. I mean, most of the time, you know, men think that women get jobs because, you know, they get put in these positions just because they want to make it look good, sort of thing. Like women are more suited to dealing with a crisis, you know, and women themselves believe this to be true. But the funniest thing was, of course, at the end of it, the only people who thought that women were not differentially placed in precarious leadership positions were men. You know, and so but it's all about this sort of idea of perceptions. But I mean, you know, it's very hard for us because we are not social scientists. You know, we do not study this, but it's interesting to think about when you get to these positions. Is how do you act? What do you do? And sort of where do you go from here? And one of the points she made, what I thought was very good, was the issues with stereotypes. The stereotypes are not just descriptive. It's not just somebody making a stereotype, they're prescriptive. So the roles that you're allowed to kind of then leap into and the roles that you define yourself as are actually stereotypical as well. And so there's a problem with moving breaking free of these.
So Jackie mentioned the concept of the personal and political, certainly something from the 70s to here, but what we wondered is the personal relevant. I mean, this is why we looked to other people who've done the theoretical research. And we just really haven't got time to do the entire theory of everything to do with how women are in situations men. But we just thought we'd pick up a couple of theoretical points that illustrate our point. And one is a theory called lounge expectancy theory. And this is a theory that looks at the relationship between language, gender, and credibility. And the language expectancy theory is illustrated in such a way that there's a normal band of communication that people are expected to communicate within. If the expectation is low and you speak better than that, then people are positively influenced. If the expectation is normal and you communicate within that, then people are positively influenced. If the expectation is high and you fall below that, then people are negatively influenced and they won't do what you encourage them to do. And what they then did was looked at that expectation band for different groups of people. And for men and experts, the normative band of acceptable behaviour is very broad. So the expert can speak according a number of different ways with authority and be listened to. What we found for women, there was a very narrow band of expected behaviour, and therefore it's much more easy for women to fall out of the normal. There's a much bigger band of unacceptable language and behaviour and ways to talk. And in that context, then, women would not be listened to. And the interesting thing in this is obviously that women can be experts. You know, we listened to Jenny's talk today, and she set out very clearly in her first couple of slides her expertise. And I could almost hear you doing that as you buy the crime thing. In order to establish with the police, I can say don't touch that, and they won't touch it because they believe you're an expert and not just as a woman. Because if you just got up as a woman and said don't touch it, it would be what does she know? But because you're an expert, that's okay. Now, expertise is only situational, so you can't carry it from one situation to another. It's only a situation in which you're operating. So that Jackie can obviously say in her lab, you know, don't put your finger in the centrifuge and expect people to listen to that. But when she moves beyond that onto issues of how the university might be managed, or even how the first year should be structured, then the question of whether people take her expertise or not can become more gender-laden. And this means that if you're not being considered an expert, these some forms of communication are going to work very badly for you. And that includes negative arguments, which is any kind of threat-based statement. If you do this, then a negative thing will happen, which as a conservative is practically an anti-dialogue. Anything which involves aggressiveness or verbal intensity, the use of strong and emotive language, are all likely to be argument strategies which cause people to lock down and not to listen to you. And so these are things that this particular theory advises us to avoid. What a whole number of communication theories shows in terms of influence and influence techniques is that the ability of a sourcer, me or you or any other communicator, to communicate on a topic is shaped more by the characteristics of the receiver than it is by the nature of the message. And that makes up the nature of the speaker. So that really tells us very much that if we want to shape how we're received, we do have to go out there and change who's listening to us and how they're listening to us. And this is my favourite slide from influence that I've used before. That it's not what does matter, what should matter to people, it's what does matter to people that really counts. And that's something anyone who's trying to change the situation needs to be very, very aware of. The person that's listening to you, what do they actually care about? Because that's what's going to shape how they process you and what you say. So, what conclusions can we make? If you want to conform, if you want to accept the situation on that basis, then in many traditional environments, this is the right thing to do. Be positive, be super rational, be conservative, dress and language, and perhaps use masculine behaviours. Now, the quotes that I read out from SurveyMonkey, we had them after we made the slide. And yet the SurveyMonkey was practically a description of this. Be less, don't wear the jewellery. Hold back, avoid swearing. So it's very interesting how people absorb this kind of message without ever actually being told it. So one strategy is to conform effectively, to accept the norms and to work with them. Another strategy, of course, is to walk away, to move out of it, to make your own. A few people talked about setting up their own business. Jackie was telling me stories about people who had life coaching. And after life coaching decided to leave because I was quite uncomfortable to stay and part of it. And the third strategy is to stay and campaign, and that's what we're being urged to this afternoon today. Stay in and fight it out. We're the ones here that have to make a change. I put this slide up because the Equality Challenge Unit statistical report can give you page after page and page of data that tell you that the campaign needs to happen. I think that women in academia in Wales, median salary is 18.6% lower than men. There is an issue. It's not just personal. It's not just about women, as the previous speaker said. If you're black and minority ethnic, then your chance of success is so significantly different than a white male professor and a white male acting. So you can get involved in the campaign, and this is what we continually get sucked into doing. I went to a meeting about this, standing in for somebody else, came out, found myself in a working group. So how can I do that? And so this, you go back to my pie. I've just added another slice. Not only have we got to balance work and life and the rugby and World Cup Day costume and Philly's party and what buying for presents and all those things. Also now got to read these statistics the night before the meeting while sewing the World Cup Day costume as Charlie thinks up in order to go into the meeting and carry on the campaign. So it can be, well, a little bit hard work, and it's not surprising that all of us choose different strategies. But the one question that we asked our graduates that we wanted to end on was, who are your role models? And reading the list of role models, there was two things that were surprising. One was how nice they were to us, and the other was how ordinary that list of role models was. It was the people around them. It was you and I. It was their manager. It was their colleagues. It was their teachers. It wasn't necessarily all the stellar people. It was the ordinary people. And this really is the answer to us here. We are the role models. Whatever we choose to do, whichever of those three strategies we choose to take, people will watch us and learn from that. It's not someone else whose job it is to choose that. And so that's what we really hope that Jackie and I here are showing you how this is a student party, by the way, this is showing you how we become role models. But we usually wanted to leave you that with quite a positive thing, that everything we do, the little things that we do, people do notice and they do learn from and they are inspired by.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
It's slightly overrun, as is the one for the lunch. If we could break for coffee and tea now, keep all our questions stored. Everybody come back for a good debate. So it's about, it says 5:55. Should we say, well, it's 10 to 4 now, well, we better say 4:05. 4:05 on the dot if we can, so we have time for some discussion. That's fine for everybody. Thank you very much.